Will you be there when the stars align?
Hello everyone, welcome back to the TJOmega channel for day 1253 of our daily content grind. Today, it's time for another debate to pit you all against each other so I can watch the bloodshed. Though I don't really allow arguments in my comment section, so that never actually happens, but it's fun to see the debates and the different opinions on things. Last time, we asked, should Megatron always be the villain? Because there's been so many depictions of Megatron being either sympathetic or downright heroic over the last few years that it's becoming a popular depiction of the character, but it does go against his original origins, conception, and of course all of his original most famous depictions. But by about a 70 to 30, you seem to agree that you can write a story where Megatron's the good guy. And I'm proud of you. I am proud of you. For the other 30%, you've got plenty of stories where Megatron is a villain. It looks like in Skybound, he's going to be a villain again. I'm sure he's going to be a villain in the next cartoon. He's ultimately always going to be the bad guy. But there's always room in fiction to play around and explore characters and figure out new things for them to do. So to leave that door open for him to potentially have a heroic arc, I think is ultimately for the best. I think we've told some very engaging Megatron stories because of it. So, thank you for participating in the poll. Good to see, I love seeing the interaction. I love seeing you put your opinion in. So today we got another one for you. How was this thing created? Now, there are a lot of different origin stories for the Transformers these days, but we're going to boil them all down into what is essentially the two major ones, right? So we have origin stories that start with Primus, and we have origin stories that start with the Quintessons. So we're going to largely focus on those two roots of the Transformers' potential origins, depending on the fictions. So let's begin with what's most popular these days, and that is the Primus origin. And this is, Transformers' religion for essentially. Primus is the planet Cybertron. For one reason or another, he has become the planet that the Transformers were born from. This one is pretty self-explanatory. This one is pretty easy. Primus is this interdimensional being, merges with a planetoid, becomes a planet Cybertron, births Transformers like zits. That kind of varies depending on continuity. Point being, they just kind of sprung up, and you have different ways of telling that story as well. So with the Primus origin story, the creation of the Transformers usually flows in two different ways. You either have just life emerging on the planet, with Prima being the very first one to arise, and that's where the creation matrix begins its story as well. Or you have the 13, the very first Transformers to be created, and thus start giving life to all other Transformers based on their own archetypes. And both of them work for different reasons. You have essentially natural evolution happening on the planet, just in mechanical form, or you have these grand creators who were responsible for getting an entire species off the ground. And depending on how you write the story, either one can be compelling and lead to a lot of different possibilities storyline-wise. Which, by the way, we are going to focus very heavily on storyline possibilities when it comes to both of these origin stories, because they do differ tremendously. One thing about this origin story is it does kind of play to real-life religion. The things that we all believe in, or some of us do anyway. Don't get into religious debates in the comment sections. I will delete you immediately. The point is, it's more relatable because, as an origin story goes, it's more akin to what we're used to. So we're going to point that out. With Primus as an element in the story, you do have a lot of different things you can bring in. There is, of course, Primus intervening. When it came to Cybertron, Primus was actually kind of neutral. Cyber Planet keys, or Force chips in the original version, were essentially Primus giving his creations a boon when they most needed it. And a lot of times, that was actually kind of iffy, because he would give those boons to Decepticons as much as Autobots. Traditionally, Primus identifies with the Autobots. I mean, in some depictions, he is literally the being that Rodimus Prime is based on. That's why in that first shot, it actually looks like Hot Rod's head, because he's the chosen one. So he kind of looks like Primus. Point being, Primus in the story means you do have that overwhelming force in the universe that can intervene in what's happening with the Transformers. You also have, oh, my voice cracked a little bit. It's been a long day. You also have things that are born of Primus himself, like Vector Sigma, and you have access to all of those as far as your story goes. Artifacts of his creation, whether that is the 13 and the things that they, their artifacts that they're known for, or just straight up things like the creation matrix, or, Vector Sigma, or the various artifacts throughout Transformers that harken back to Primus as their origin. If you want to include things like, a Star Saber crafted by a god in your story, you need Primus to be around, and that needs to be your origin. So let's bounce a little bit here. So it's some of the story possibility when it comes to Primus. What about the Quintessons? So in this version, Cybertron is just a barren planetoid. There's nothing really special about it. It just happens to be a basis for which the Quintessons start building. And they build and they build and they build until we have an entire metallic planet that was originally just a small planetoid. I have to include that because canonically there is organic material on Cybertron, and it's not even a Beast Machines thing. That's a G1 thing as well. So I choose to believe that the core of Cybertron ends up being more rocky and natural, even if Cybertronian things have been built into it. Because we've seen G1 episodes with caves, I do have to go, okay, yes, at least part of this planet was a rock at one time. Point being, when you have the Quintessons as the creators of the Transformers, you have something that might not be as familiar to us and not as relatable to us as the readers or viewers, but what you have is something that technically in fiction makes more sense, rather than having that leap of machines that are alive and work like organisms. You have just plain old machines that have been built and were programmed and designed for specific purposes, who then AI evolved in a way AI is actually supposed to work into the living robotic life forms that we know today. So in that, you have an origin that makes a little bit more sense logically, and it's something that's a little bit more akin to sci-fi writing. And when you bring in the Quintessons, your story potential basically goes with whatever they themselves are attached to. For instance, you get their entire crew of minions. So you have dozens of different Quintesson design styles, archetypes. You have, the whole Judgment thing to work with. You have their prosecutors, their guards, the Sharkticons. Quintessons come with a lot. They come with this entire origin to back up, what they are and what they are. They feel like a universal threat. And that's the key difference between the two. Primus is just, he is ultimately a kind god to the robots that were birthed from him. And he's always depicted as a heroic force outside of shattered glass, obviously. But the Quintessons are usually, almost always in fact, the villains, and is kind of terrifying when your own creator is your arch enemy. It also is handy to have a third faction because they are a threat to both Autobot and Decepticon alike, which gives you a lot more potential for how to use them in the storyline. Of course, we have seen that very recently, where Quintessons have actually expanded exactly what they can be in fiction. You know, with Transformers 1 introducing the idea of Quintessons ruling over Cybertron, even after the Transformers had been born, you get something more akin to the G1 origin story, but there is a far darker twist to it, especially when you find out some characters are working alongside them. Some are actually embracing the enslavement of the Quintessons. Now you're getting really weird. But that's not something you can necessarily do with Primus as the origin point. Now, granted, Primus is a thing in Transformers 1, but, you know, semantics. Well, the point is here, you can't expand on what exactly the Quintessons do in storyline. And that's really like the menace that I enjoy about Quintessons as the origin point. Like I said, it is just terrifying to think that, you know, like if Primus was an antagonistic force and, you know, like, and a threat to Autobots and Decepticons alike, it would be horrifying. You'd root for Unicron, even if Unicron was a bad guy just coming for a snack. And they're like, no, eat him. He's a jerk. We've been trying to get rid of him for centuries. But with them as the villains, you have a villain that knows the Transformers better than they know themselves. You know, obviously they've evolved beyond what the Quintessons ever envisioned, so they are capable of things the Quints did not plan on. However, they have a deep understanding of exactly what makes up their psychology and exactly what makes them who they are. Literally how they tick, because they're the ones who built the tickers. It's not just the fact that your creator is antagonistic. Your creator knows you better than you do, which makes them very threatening and very terrifying written correctly. Oh, and speaking of the way these things are written, for those movie fans in there, I am including the Cube as a Quintesson origin story. If we are to believe Quintessa at the end, you know, in The Last Night, she does claim to be the creator of Optimus Prime and the Transformers. So if she's the one who launched the Cube, this is a Quintesson origin story technically. And it all just kind of is rooted in the same ideal of the Quintessons built everything that is Cybertron. So I'm including that just in case you think there's a third option here and you think, oh, the Cube, but the Cube. No, the Cube is Quintesson. We've established this. Even if the Quintessons were very poorly handled in that movie. But that said, if that origin story is valid as a Quintesson origin story, that story also includes original primes. I mean, 7 of them instead of 13, but the point stands. They are part of that story regardless of having Primus or not, which means maybe that aspect of Primus really isn't exclusive to him after all. You can intermix these origin stories together, and it does work the other way. We'll get to that in a bit. But as long as we're back to Primus, let's go into like some of the crazier things that we have done with the character and other things that we can do. Obviously, there is the part where he is a Transformer himself. Thank you, Transformers Cybertron, for introducing that little nugget into the universe. It does make perfect sense that the creator of Transformers, being robotic himself, would also be able to transform. And the idea of Planet Cybertron just like shape-shifting into a giant robot not only makes sense canonically, it's just really cool. It's just a really cool thing to do. Granted, we're never going to get one big enough. We're never going to get a Primus that is large enough. I'm sorry, HasLab fans, it ain't happening. It ain't happening. Primus is not a major enough character. Cybertron itself is not enough of a pull. If Unicron could barely pass the mark, Primus will not. You can tell. I'm still a little bit salty over people who want Primus as a HasLab. I want it too, but I'm being practical here. But no, like that's something the Quints definitely can't do. Like maybe you get a story where Quintessa, like the planet Quintessa, is a Transformer itself because the Quints built something to rival the Transformers, you know, or something to parallel Unicron. That is possible. With a Primus origin story, you get metaphysical. You actually get a spiritual aspect beyond the whole, like, I created you thing. But Primus begins as this ethereal creature of immense power that battled with Unicron before time itself existed. So when you factor that in, okay, you are not, by introducing Primus as the origin, you're actually expanding the scope of what the Transformer universe is. You're introducing essentially a completely different realm that you could draw possibility from. Are Primus and Unicron the only beings like this? Are there other ones in the galaxy? Are there some walking amongst Transformers right now? That is a lot of story potential, and frankly, untapped story potential. Do you really think only two beings like this existed? Surely there has to be others. Others that had other fates happen to them, some who still exist, some who might have died, and their remnants are now, the Autobots or Decepticons' problem. You have possibility there. And then you have the crazy stuff IDW did by just having God as one of us. Just a clown like one of us. Rung is a great character, by the way. I love Rung, and I love the twist that, like, oh yeah, by the way, that's Primus. That's your god. So yeah, there's plenty of story potential to Primus himself. And the Quintessons are not short on story potential either. We have some really good potential that we can do here. Can I remember his name? And I'm certainly not trying to look it up very quickly. This is Clementia. Clementia is the Quintesson from the Return of Optimus Prime, the final episode of Season 3. He's the one who restored Optimus Prime to life. He's the only one who survived the hate plague without ever being infected in any way, shape, or form. Remember, Prime as a corpse carried the infection. So, yeah, we had some fun here. But that does raise story potential, because you can have Quintessons who aren't really affiliated and aren't really on board with the whole, like, destroy all Transformers and take Cybertron back thing. This one in particular, in later stories, would eventually become an ally of the Autobots and lead to peace treaties between Quintesson and Autobot, which is kind of a cool thing. And that's another story aspect that we've barely explored. So you can have them as individual characters, not just this one amazing, like this massive army that's bent on destruction. You have the other things that they have created, time vortexes and the Dweller, of all things. Quintessons experiment a lot, because they are geniuses, because they are master creators, and because there's so many of them scattered across the universe, all doing their own thing. You can write them to have been doing pretty much anything you want, as long as it's somewhere in the realm of technology an alien could create in your universe. You got so much potential for what could be out there to threaten Transformers and to write stories around. That is potential that Primus doesn't really represent. Primus is one thing. He created Cybertron and thus created Transformers. But we have lots of different potential when it does come to the Quintessons as a different origin, which I love that. We have even seen where Quintessons can work with Unicron in a sense, or even be a benefactor of the Decepticons. That's something else that we can do, and this is also a Quintesson that continued making Transformers, being the Terracons in Energon. And that's another thing that even like G1 failed to do. They created Transformers to begin with, but the Quintessons after that pretty much just made Alicons and Sharkticons, and that's it. They could have gone a lot farther. Like, we kind of missed the story potential of Quintessons making more Transformers that are loyal to them. Again, something that could absolutely be tapped at some point. But as I pointed out before, the thing with Quintessons is the same thing with the Primus origin story. In Transformers 1, the Quintessons coexist with Primus, and that's something that happened in Earthspark as well. So they're not mutually exclusive. You can have Quintessons in a story where Primus is the origin of Transformers. You don't necessarily need them to be the origin point. That said, you could also interweave them into it the opposite way, where maybe Primus just turns into Cybertron, but doesn't actually create anything of himself. Maybe it's the Quintessons finding and invading his planetary form, and they start using the material there to make Transformers. That's another possibility we've never explored. So these ideas are not mutually exclusive. In either direction, you absolutely could make them the origin story of Transformers, even if you combine the two to exist in the same universe. But that is going to be up to you. So, as with all of these debates, in the description below, you are going to find a link to a straw poll. Just click that link, vote on which one you prefer. This is absolutely just a preferential thing. I know there's some people who are going to say both. Some people are going to introduce other origins. These are the two major ones, so it's just whichever one do you prefer. Okay, so and with that, we're going to call it a video. So thank you everyone for watching. I will see you next time.
The day is getting closer. My journey is almost over. And when it is, our journey begins. The question is, when the stars align, will you be there?